Which is it?
Hey, I'm Zev Elif, Associate Professor of Jewish History at Touro College and Hebrew Theological College, and I'm joined today by a real mentor of mine, Dr. Gary Zola, who serves as the Executive Director of the Jacob Rader Marcus Center of American Jewish Archives and the Edward M. Ackerman Family Distinguished Professor of the American Jewish Experience and Reform Jewish History at Hebrew Union College. There isn't a book, article, or thought in American Jewish history that I have conceived that doesn't owe something, usually a lot of things, to the American Jewish Archives. There isn't a monograph that hasn't borrowed, hasn't leveraged, that doesn't owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to what Professor Zola has done with the American Jewish Archives, succeeding Jacob Rader Marcus. It is the repository, it is the intellectual home of the study of American Jewish history.
Thank you, Professor Elif. It really is a great pleasure to be with you, and I thank you for those compliments. I'm not about me, but you rightfully point to the American Jewish Archives, which is a treasure and a salute to our the founder of our field, Jacob Rader Marcus. So thank you.
So, this segment is Which Is It? And what we're going to explore today takes us back, you've done so much work. You've been really ensconced in the 19th century, and you've slowly made your way further on to the end of the 19th century, but you began your career with a dissertation, a biography of Isaac Harvey, which we'll explore in a moment. But the question we're going to ask in the Which Is It? Is American Reform Judaism. Was it a migration, a transmission from Europe to the United States, or was it a fully American iteration of this religious movement? So that's what we're going, not necessarily to solve, but to explore for a little bit today.
Well, thank you. Let me begin by saying very quickly that I think it's fair to create in your mind a metaphor for the history of reform in America as a cord that's made up of three strands. And those three these are they. First is, of course, what you might call indigenous American issues. Second would be German reform influence. And third would be the Americanization process. That is, these three ideas bind together, and they help us to understand the whole flow of history. Now, going to your question directly, this is, in a sense, where the debate begins. It's a historiographical debate, as I'm going to show in just a minute. And I wish I could say it is as important as some of the historical debates like the frontier thesis or economic determinism or something. I don't know that this historiographical debate is as great and significant as those, but it is a clear debate, and it has evolved over history. This is the earliest sketch that we have of Kahal Kadosh Beth Elohim, which is one of the original 5 American congregations, and Jewish life, of course, goes back to the early 18th century, but this congregation was formed in 1749, and in the year 1794, this is during Washington's administration, they put up a building, and this is a sketching of the building. It's the earliest sketching that we have.
In Charleston, South Carolina.
That's correct, in Charleston, South Carolina. And this is from the Library of Congress collection. It's very interesting because better known is the sketching by this man, Solomon Caravaggio. That's an important name to remember because we're going to meet his father in just a minute. And his sketching is here, this famous, beautiful drawing of that same building, but much more famous, and as a later sketching, because you see the iron fence that's around it, and that iron fence is still standing to this day, despite the destruction of that building. The destruction of the building is important. This is how it looked on the inside. It's also noteworthy to see that this was definitely a traditional synagogue with the Sephardic influence, but Ashkenazic influence as well, because you see Bima is not all the way on the western wall. It's in the middle, a little closer to the Aron HaKodesh, the Bima, the ark, than it would normally be. Now, it was Isaac Harvey in 1824 who led a movement of a significant number of Charlestonians to reform Judaism. And that experiment is considered to be the very first formalized, organized attempt to reform Judaism in the United States of America. He had two other very prominent figures who worked with him. And one is the father of our artist friend, Solomon Carvalho. This is David Nunez Carvalho. And the important figure, very important because he was the historian of the society, is Abraham Moise. And these folks essentially petitioned their home congregation, Beth Elohim, KKBE, for a variety of changes. They wanted more relevant and engaging worship. They wanted more tasteful and refined worship service. And they wanted to enhance Jewish learning. They were discouraged at the ignorance of their children and the apathy of their children. They created articles of faith, which I'm going to show you a picture of this. This is actually a copy of one member's personal copy of the Articles of Faith. Bottom line on the society, which eventually published a little of their prayer book. This was done by Moise in the year 1830. By this time, the society had already petered out. It had a short life. It was what you might call a flash in the pan, or a supernova that burned itself out very quickly as a result of the decline in the economy that took place in 1828.
The War of 1812 and the embargo of the poor, and then Harvey actually leaving to New York.
That's right, and by the way, Carvalho, the one of his partners, who was the head of the society for a year, he also left. He left and ends up in Baltimore. The only one who remained is Moise, and Moise wants to memorialize the society. Now, the question that you pose has been dealt with by historians. They want to ask the question: what was it that stimulated the beginning of the society? Why did these people come together? And the question is: were the influences primarily their own American influences, or were they copycatting something else that was going on in Europe? And if you take a look at this, what I put in front of the students or put in front of you, you will see that there's a historiographical, if you will, chronology. The first biographer of Isaac Harvey is the first to just put it out there that, as you can see, this man, L.C. Moise, who says that these people, he reads their petition, their memorial, which I'm going to show you in a minute, and he says they were influenced by the German Jewish thought. And that, in a way, sort of carries the day. And people begin to just assume that's what it was. The great American Jewish historian, student of Jacob Rader Marcus, Bert Korn, somewhat later writes also that the very name of the society, in other words, he views the society as a translation of, why did they pick society? Why didn't they? He views that as a translation of the Hebrew word chevra, and therefore the influence of Europe is not only in the name, but as you see, he says there's no doubt they were aware of German influence.
Rhine, like Leopold Zunz, both of them.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Great point. And then Dr. Marcus, who told me that his greatest student, and I'm not that person, and I was thinking he was going to tell me it was Dr. Sarna, but his greatest student, he felt, was Bert Korn. And Dr. Marcus, as you can see in his United States Jewry, which appears in the late 80s, first volume, he too says that they were influenced by the Reform movement. And Naomi Cohen, the great pioneering woman scholar of the American Jewish experience, she too makes this claim. But Professor Elif, I would say that starting in the 90s with my volume, and before me actually, even Dr. Michael Meyer's history, this begins to change because we tend to think that there was a misreading of an important paragraph that occurs in the first petition that these reformers made to their congregation, Beth Elohim, asking for these changes. And in that memorial, they basically say, I'm not going to read all of this, we don't have time, but I'm going to just simply say, they say, this is directly from their memorial, they say, as you can see, after making all of the causes clear why they need to reform Judaism, and they go through point after point after point, all of these points are based on American issues, all of them, local American issues. They come to their conclusion, as you can say, you see it says right in front of you, they say, in concluding, after I've made all these points, we want to alert the congregation leaders to reformation that's already going on in Holland, Germany, and Prussia. And then they provide you with proof of that statement by quoting from a journal, which to this day, nobody knows exactly what journal it is and where it is. I hope one day somebody will find the exact article. It had to be around 1824. It was probably published in Charleston in some newspaper that they read. And if you read this carefully, they basically simply say, these changes that we're asking for are already taking place in Europe. And then they come to their, what you would call in English, their Sakdalager, which is a fancy word for this climactic ending. And as you can see, this I do want to read because it's so moving. After they say that point, they say that, as you can see, that thus from the above article, it appears that no climes, nor even tyranny itself, can forever fetter or control the human mind, and that even amidst the intolerance of Europe, our brethren have anticipated the free citizens of America in the glorious work of reformation. In other words, to summarize, they're saying, listen, everything we're asking for, which is based on our need, has been done, is being done in Europe, and this is shameful because America is the land of the free and Europe is the land of the oppressed. And therefore, they say, let's have it here in America. You can't stop this. And I wish just to, this is not in direct response to your question, Dr. Elif, but you should see this powerful ending that they say, we wish not to overthrow, but to rebuild. We wish not to destroy, but to reform and revise the evils complained of. We wish not to abandon the institutions of Moses, but to understand and to observe them. In fine, we wish to worship God, not as slaves of bigotry and priestcraft, which is so American, but as the enlightened descendants of that chosen race whose blessings have been scattered throughout the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, to end, what I think Dr. Meyer says and what I say is correct. If we mean by German influence or European influence that they used the fact that it existed in Europe to justify their arguments, that's a fair statement. But when to say that the entire project was based as a copycat or influenced, it was stimulated as if it began because of the German reform, this is clearly an error, in my opinion. It's clearly mistaken. Because what you're doing then is you're ignoring the entirety of their memorial, where one issue after another, we don't have time today to go into these issues, but if you read it, the objective mind will clearly point out that these issues were all localized issues. They were concerned about the local ignorance of the Charlestonian Jews. They were concerned about the attempt to convert the Jews and to teach them in America why they should become Christian, and the Jews didn't know enough to be able to defend themselves. They were concerned about similar issues that sparked German reform, of course, because they didn't understand the Portuguese service and they didn't understand Hebrew. By the way, I'm the first one to point out that Isaac Harvey's son, his oldest son, Solomon, just so happens to have been 13 years of age in 1824. And my feeling is, without any proof, this is just supposition, that Harvey was personally, he was upset by the fact that his own son probably had no interest in Judaism. And this is what motivated a man who, as you know, because I talk about this, Harvey was not really active in the Charleston Synagogue until this idea. So the correct answer, I think, and I think it's indisputable, the earlier historical trend was really based on this statement that a man who really didn't even know history well wrote the first biography, Moise wrote, and people continued to build on this. But it's a misreading of their memorial. Their memorial is clearly using that example to say what we're doing is not from Mars. It's not something that never has been done. It's already being done. And it's shameful that in America, we won't put up with priestcraft. We won't put up with the influence of dictators and of aristocratic Jews. We will make up our own minds.
In some ways, they were obviously inspired by the early Republic. And what you and Michael Myers show clearly is that the historical actors themselves knew Haskalah, knew Reform. In his anniversary memorial, I think in a footnote, Harvey acknowledges and credits Moses Mendelssohn from an earlier iteration, Haskalah, more than he is Reform. But what they're doing is a reclamation of Reform, that it ought to be an American project, and that triple helix, that Chuta Meshulash, as you point out, obviously has the nuance, the sophistication that speaks for all parties involved. Thanks for clicking and learning. And here are some links to related videos. And subscribe. Don't miss out to making meaning of the past in the present for the future.